Sorcerers abide by their experience. They have changed believing for seeing. They speak of the spirit, not because they believe in its existence, but because they have seen it. But they don't see it as a loving father who watches over us from up above. For them, the spirit is something much more direct and immediate, a state of awareness which transcends reason. Everything that reaches our senses is a sign. The only thing you need to have is the necessary speed to silence your mind and capture the message. By means of these indications, the spirit talks to us in a very clear voice. That voice is not a metaphor. It is literal. Sometimes it speaks in words, other times it just whispers, or presents a scene before our eyes, like a movie. In that way, the spirit transmits its commands to us, which can be summarized in a single expression: intent. The voice of the spirit speaks equally to everyone, but we don't realize it. We are so preoccupied with our thoughts that instead of making silence and listening, we prefer all kinds of subterfuges. That's why the reminding voice exists. The reminding voice is a resource of attention, a way of accessing another level of awareness. We can use almost anything to tune into the spirit, because, finally, it is behind all that exists. But certain things attract us more than others. In general, people have their prayers, their amulets, or elaborate rituals, private and collective. The ancient sorcerers were prone to mysticism. They used astrology, oracles and incantations, magical sticks, anything that could deceive the vigilance of reason. But for the new seers, those resources are a waste and they hide a danger. They can deviate a person's attention so that, instead of focusing on his immediate bond with the spirit, he becomes addicted to symbols. Today's warriors prefer less ostentatious methods. My teacher recommended intending inner silence directly. Sorcery is the art of silence. Silence is a passageway between worlds. When our mind stays silent, incredible aspects of our being emerge. Starting from that moment, a person becomes a vehicle of intent, and all his acts begin to ooze power. During my apprenticeship, my benefactor showed me inexplicable feats which frightened me, but at the same time stirred up my ambition. I wanted to be as powerful as he was. I often asked him how I could learn his tricks, but he placed a finger on his lips and stared at me. It took years before I could appreciate the magnificent lesson of his answer. The key to sorcery is silence. Silence is not definable. When you practice it, you perceive it. If you try to understand it, you block it. Don't see it as something difficult or complex, because it is not something from another world, it is just silencing the mind. I could tell you that silence is like a dock where ships arrive. If the dock is occupied, there is no space for anything new. That's my image of the matter, but the truth is I don't know how to speak about it. Inner silence is not only the absence of thoughts. Rather, it is about suspending judgment, witnessing without interpreting. Entering silence could be defined, in the typically contradictory way of sorcerers, as learning how to think without words. For many this doesn't make sense, because we are accustomed to consulting your mind about everything. The ironic thing is that for starters, our thoughts are not even ours. They sound through us, which is different. And since they have been pestering us ever since we learned to use our reason, we have ended up getting used to them. If you ask the mind, it will tell you that the purpose of sorcerers is nonsense, because it cannot be rationally demonstrated. Instead of advising you to go and verify that purpose honestly, it will order you to hide behind a solid block of interpretations. Therefore, if you want to have a chance, there is only one possible way out: disconnect the mind. Freedom is achieved without thinking. I know people who were able to stop their internal dialogue, and they no longer interpret, they are pure perception, they are never disappointed or regretful, because everything they do starts from the center of decisions. They have learned to deal with their mind in terms of authority, and they live in the most authentic state of freedom. Silence is our natural condition. We were born from silence and there we will return. What contaminates us are all the superfluous ideas that percolate through us, due to our collective way of living. Every time we have an opportunity, we tranquilize each other by talking about something. After millennia of coexistence, we have internalized these exchanges to the point that whether we are asleep or awake, our mind is never quiet, it is always talking to itself. We spend our lives regurgitating an endless list of opinions on almost everything. We receive thoughts in clusters, one connects with the other one, until the entire space of the mind is packed full. That noise has no use, because, practically in its entirety, it is devoted to the enlargement of the ego. Because it goes against everything that we've been taught since we were children, silence should be attempted in a spirit of combat. At this time you have a great advantage: the experience of stalkers. Sorcerers nowadays recommend that we pass through the world without getting any attention, treating everything equally. A warrior stalker becomes the owner of the situation, for better or for worse, because there is something terribly effective about acting without the mind. The sources of the internal dialogue are fed by our personal history. However, through millennia of practice, sorcerers have observed that, deep down, we are very similar. And there are situations that have the effect of silencing all of us. My teacher gave me various techniques to silence my mind which, well understood, can be reduced to one: intent. Silence is intended crudely, making the effort. It is about insisting, over and over again. It does not mean to repress our thoughts, but rather learning how to control them. Silence begins with a command, an act of will, which becomes the command of the indescribable force. However, we must keep in mind that as long as we impose silence on ourselves, we will never truly be there, but in the imposition. We have to learn to transform will into intent. Silence is calm, it is to yield, to let yourself go. It produces a sensation of absence. Silence is the fundamental condition of the path and will come rushing in, stopping the world and hurtling you into a paradoxical state, for it is new and at the same time well known. The technique of observation, that is, of contemplating the world without preconceived ideas, works very well with the elements. For example, with flames, running water, cloud formations, or the sunset. The new seers call it to deceive the machine because, in essence, it consists of learning to intend a new description. We have to fight boldly to get it, but, after it happens, the new state of awareness is sustained naturally. You have a foot inside the door is already open, and it is just a matter of accumulating enough energy to pass through to the other side. It's important that our intent is intelligent. The effort it takes to achieve silence would count for nothing, if we didn't first create conditions favorable to sustaining it. Therefore, besides the training and observation of the elements, a warrior is forced to do something very simple, but very difficult: ordering his life. We all live in a chain of intensity which we call time. Since we can't see its source, we never stop to think of its end. While we are young we feel eternal, and when we grow old, the only thing left is to complain about the wasted time. But that is an illusion. Time is not wasted, we waste ourselves. The idea that we have time is a misunderstanding that makes us waste energy on all kinds of commitments. When a man connects with inner silence, he puts a new value on his time. So another way to define it would be to say that silence is an acute awareness of the present. An infallible method for reaching silence is not doing, an activity that we program with our mind, but which has the virtue of silencing our thought once it is in motion. My teacher called that kind of technique to remove one thorn with another. As examples of not doings, he mentioned listening in the dark, changing the priority of our senses, and the command that compels us to fall asleep as soon as we close our eyes. Also, to talk with plants, to observe the shadows and the distance or spaces between the leaves of trees. All those activities are among the most effective to silence our internal dialogue, but they have a defect: we cannot sustain them for a long time. After a while, we are forced to return to our routines. A not doing that is exaggerated will automatically lose its power and become a doing. If what we want is to accumulate deep silence with a lasting effect, the best not doing is solitude. Together with energy saving, learning how to be alone is the third practical principle of the path. The warrior's world is the most solitary thing there is. Even when several apprentices unite to travel the routes of power together, each one knows that he is alone, that he cannot expect anything from the others, nor can he depend on anybody. The only thing he can do is to share his path with those who accompany him. To be alone requires a great effort, because we haven't learned how to overcome the genetic command of socialization yet. It is normal that sorcerers look for silence in the solitude of mountains or in the desert, and that they live alone during long periods. You say that this is a hideous perspective? Hideous is to spend our old age like weeping children. One of the ironies of modern life is that the more communication increases, the more solitary we feel. Ordinary man's existence is one of harrowing loneliness. He looks for company, but cannot find himself. His love has been devaluated, his dream is pure fantasy. His natural curiosity has become a strictly personal concern, and the only thing he has left is his attachments. On the other hand, the warrior's solitude is like a lover's retreat. And the warrior's love is everywhere, because it is this earth, where he will wander for such a brief time. So, wherever he goes, the warrior surrenders to his romance. Naturally, he will sometimes avoid dealing with the world. Inner silence is solitary. The sorcerers of antiquity used power plants to stop the internal dialogue. But today's warriors prefer less risky and more controlled conditions. The same results produced by power plants can be obtained when we are up against the wall. Facing extreme situations, like danger, fear, sensorial saturation, and aggression, something in us reacts and takes control, the mind becomes alert and automatically suspends its chatter. Deliberately creating that situation is called stalking. However, the favorite method of warriors is recapitulation. Recapitulation stops the mind in a natural way. The main detonators of our thoughts are pending matters, expectations, and defense of the ego. It is very difficult to find a person whose internal dialogue is sincere. Usually, we hide our frustrations and go to the opposite extreme. The content of our mind turns into an ode to me. To recapitulate puts an end to all that. After a time of sustained effort, something crystallizes there inside. The habitual dialogue becomes incoherent, uncomfortable. The only remedy is to stop it. An apprentice in this phase will normally find himself facing a crossfire. On the one hand is the homogenization of his assemblage point, and on the other, some enormous parentheses of silence which strains through his mind, breaking it into fragments. When the inertia of the internal dialogue is broken, the world is made over and becomes new. The wave of energy feels like an unbearable vacuum opening under his feet. The only thing that comforts him in such a situation is to keep the purpose of his path clear to himself, and not lose, under any circumstances, his perspective of freedom. An impeccable warrior never loses his sanity. If, when applying some of these techniques, warriors feel that their mind shivers, and a voice that is not the habitual one begins to whisper things to them, that is normal and they should not be scared. They are not going mad, they are entering into the consensus of sorcerers. Inner silence induces displacements of the assemblage point, and these displacements are cumulative. Once a certain threshold is reached, silence can move the point a great distance by itself, but not before. The force of collective consent creates a certain inertia that varies from person to person, according to their energetic characteristics. Resistance to the world's description can vary from some seconds to 1 hour, or more, but it is not eternal. To conquer it by means of a sustained intent is what sorcerers call arriving at the threshold of silence. That rupture is felt physically, as a crack in the base of the skull or as the sound of a bell. From that starting point, it becomes a matter of how much power has been accumulated. There are those who have stopped their dialogue for some seconds and immediately get scared, begin to wonder about things or describe what they feel to themselves. Others learn how to remain in that state for hours or days, and they even use it for useful activities. But experienced sorcerers go even further than that, they can enter the other world in a definite form. In spite of its indefinable nature, we can measure silence through its results. Its final effect, the one that sorcerers look for with avidity, is that it brings us in tune with a magnificent dimension of our being, where we have access to an instantaneous and total knowledge that is not composed of reasons, but of certainties. Sorcerers give it the name, silent knowledge. You can say that a man who controls silence has cleansed his bond with the spirit, and power rains down on him in streams. A snap of the fingers, and the world is another. It is the deadly somersault of thought, because we begin in the everyday world, but we never return there again. My teacher incited everyone who surrounded him to have a romance with knowledge. It is the pure desire to know, not to feel apathy, to be vividly interested in what the spirit comes to tell you, without expecting anything from it. Having a passionate romance with knowledge is the only thing that can give us the power we need not to falter, when signs are pointing in the direction of the unknown. When his path no longer corresponds to human expectations, when it takes him to situations that challenge his reason, then we can say that a warrior has begun an intimate relationship with knowledge. Once you have had the experience of silencing your mind for a moment and allowing power to point you out, you have to adjust yourself to its message, so that your life becomes the life of a warrior. From then on, your work will consist of cultivating an honest and clean bond with infinity. Part 2, Warrior's Dialogue. You want definitions of sorcery which could guide your rationality. But that is neither possible nor useful, since I don't live in a reality of ordinary consensus. Not even I understand myself. To comprehend, is to fix our attention on a specific point, from where things can be explained. The more accepted that point is by people in general, the truer we find it. But the universe is not reasonable, its essence is beyond all description. Security and common sense are islands floating around in a bottomless sea, and we only cling to them out of fear. If you continue on the path of knowledge, you will soon discover that explanations are placebos, since they never fulfill what they promise. For each thing they clarify, they generate a trail of contradictions. In fact, we never understand anything. True teaching is physical and we only get it after years of fighting. That is the nature of the lessons of the Nagual. However, sorcerers have found that it is possible to understand things without reasoning them out, and that has led them to practice. An hour of practice can sweep years of explanations off the table, and real results appear, results that stay with you forever. As you turn yourself into a witness of power, the obsessive pressure of your mind to be in charge will be cancelled out, and in its place the childlike spirit of adventure and discovery will be reborn in you. In that state you don't think anymore, you act. Ask yourself to what extent your interest in the knowledge of the sorcerers of ancient Mexico is honest. When there are no doubts about your sincerity, and you are willing to make any effort other than that which would transgress your principles concerning honesty and charity, then you are the ideal candidate. Such principles concerning honesty and charity are those of any intelligent and normal person and are a very good base to work from. They are your basic materials. But then you have to transform them into an unbending intent, because as long as they just remain good intentions, they won't serve you in any way. I can help you to elucidate the beliefs of the seers of ancient Mexico by means of a combination of studies and experiences. There is an action program that you could incorporate in your daily life, based on 3 points: stopping your internal dialogue with the help of pure intent, compacting your energy by means of rearranging your way of life, and loosening the bounds of your mind in order to dream. The program is designed to help you loosen a little the collective fixation, and encourage you to enter into a practical commitment with the postulates of sorcerers. Reason becomes saturated when you give it too much content to work with. My teacher used to say that strange concepts, like those sorcerers deal with, should be repeated to the point of fatigue. That way, they gain a definite place in our awareness, burdened by the weight of so many trivial matters. What scares us in front of a sorcerer's lesson is that, even if we don't want to, we are constantly evaluating everything that comes to us. When the object of that analysis is an irrational proposition, it requires a lot of power to avoid prejudice. If you want to know the magical side of the world, be implacable with your reason. Don't let it make itself comfortable, take your rational thoughts to their limit, to the point of rupture. Under such circumstances, your mind will only have 2 options: to impose itself, forcing you to abandon the apprenticeship, or to be quiet, leaving you alone. For sorcerers, the totality of a path can be summed up in its first step. As for recapitulation, that means that the ideal conditions are here and now. It happens to everyone at first. To observe our life is an agitating exercise, because to get to the bottom of things scares us, and it is easy to postpone it from one day to the next. But, if we insist, after a time of scrutiny we begin to discover that what we always found to be obvious and correct ways of thinking are in fact implanted beliefs. The ideas we become addicted to are made up of the densest matter in our mental contamination. In general, they all start from a defect of syntax. If the way we speak changes, they stop making sense and are substituted by new ideas. That's why there are so many belief systems in the world. From the center of silent knowledge we all know that's why we are so rarely willing to practice our beliefs. We can spend a lifetime speaking of loving our fellow man, or turning the other cheek, but who dares to actually do it? There you have the wars for religion motives, where people are killed because of the peculiar way they pronounce God's name. Sorcerers know that beliefs based on ideas are false. The starting point of our convictions is usually something that someone told us in an imperative or persuasive tone when we were children, before we had our own inventory of experiences for comparison. Or it is one of the effects of the massive and subliminal propaganda to which modern man is subjected. Frequently, they come from a sudden and deep emotional outburst, like that suffered by those who allow themselves to be swept by religious hysteria. That modality of belief is merely associative. At the core of each one of our actions, customs, or reactions, there is a hidden belief. Therefore, the initial task on the path of knowledge is to make an inventory of all those things we have placed our faith in. I suggested that you dedicate a notebook where you should write down all your beliefs. This practice will help you to make a map of motivations and attachments. In each case you should look for the source of your beliefs, and make a profound analysis of each one. Determine when and why each arose, what was there before that, how you felt, and how much your faith has changed over the years. The intention is not to justify anything, but rather simply to get things clear. This exercise is called stalking the believer. The result of the practice will be to liberate you of your second-hand convictions. Never forget that in the world of sorcerers, only direct experimentation is valid. Classify everything with which you feel mentally identified. An endless list of thought patterns will appear, sometimes not very coherent in relation to each other. For example, one of your beliefs is that only when something can be proven and demonstrated can it be called certain. In the field of non-beliefs, most believe that dreams are only dreams rather than the means through which one can access other real and complete worlds. The second part of the exercise is to select the most important one of your beliefs, which serves as a base to all the other ones, and stop believing it for a moment. Do this with all of your beliefs, according to their degree of importance. I assure you that it is not difficult. And above all, it won't harm your faith. Remember, it is only an exercise. For most, the most ingrained conviction is that we are sinful and for that reason we are justified. We can make mistakes, squander our energy, and give in to anger, lasciviousness, whims and fear. After all, we are human, and God always forgives us. Don't fool yourself. Either you choose your belief, or it chooses you. In the first case, it is authentic, it is your ally, it sustains you, and it allows you to manipulate it at will. In the second case, it is an imposition and not worthwhile. You don't have to be clear to enter the world of sorcerers. Our idea that truth goes hand in hand with clarity is a trap, because the spirit is too inaccessible to be understood with our fragile human mind. As you well know, the essence of religion is not clarity, but faith. But faith is worth nothing in comparison with experience. Sorcerers are practical. From their point of view, what we believe or stop believing is absolutely irrelevant. The stories that we tell ourselves don't matter in the least, what matters is the spirit. When there is power, the content of the mind is something secondary. A sorcerer can be an atheist or a believer, Buddhist, Muslim or Christian, and yet cultivate impeccability, which automatically brings him to power. Don't confuse things. Religions are not remedies, but consequences of the pitiful state of awareness man is in. They are replete with good intentions, but very few people are prepared to fulfill them. If their commitment meant anything of real value, the world would be full of saints, not sinners. The moment ideologies, including Nagualism, become widespread, they become cultural mafias, schools to make people sleepy. No matter how subtle their postulates are, and no matter how much they try to validate them with personal corroboration, they end up conditioning our actions according to some form of reward or punishment, and by doing that, they pervert the very essence of the search. If the pillar of your faith is a salary, what merit does it have? Sorcerers love the purity of the abstract. For them, the value of the path with heart is not so much where it takes us but how intensively we enjoy it. Faith certainly has value in an ordinary life, but it is useless against death. Our only hope when facing the inevitable is the warrior's path. Sorcerers call the ability to manipulate their mental attachments believing without believing. They have perfected that art to the point where they can identify sincerely with any idea, live it, love it, and discard it if it comes to that, without remorse. And inside that freedom of choice, they ask sorcerers questions. For example, why accept myself as a sinner, if I can be impeccable? The main effect of the technique of believing without believing, is that it shows how incredibly fragile our catalog of ideas is, prone to disintegrate at the slightest blow. The world we live in is a magic fabric, the magic of the first ring of power. Practicing silence. As a base for inner silence, fight against your domestic condition, that is, your membership in a social group. That is the first step toward freedom. To put our interactions on trial means to analyze all over again a heap of things we have always considered as facts. The purpose is not to judge or to subvert anything, but to observe. Observing, in itself, has an effect on things. You ask how the passive act of witnessing can modify anything. Attention, however tenuous, is never passive because it is made from the same matter which makes up the universe. Even the mere act of exercising the attention implies an energy transfer. It is like the velocity, which when being applied to an object, adds mass to it. Likewise, the focus of attention adds reality to things, and that reality has a limit. Beyond that limit, the world we know disintegrates. The secret of the sorcerer's marvels is the channeling of attention. It doesn't matter how they apply it, for good or for bad, what changes is the intention, not the force on the focus. For new seers, the magic of sorcery is not in its results, but in the way we get to them. Therefore, your best intent as an apprentice is to silence your mind. All beginners try to classify silence like another element in their inventory of beliefs. The objective of your inventory is to make you aware of the weight of our prejudices. We use almost all our available energy on maintaining an image of the world, and we do it by means of conscious or unconscious suggestions. When an apprentice is liberated from that jail, he has the sensation that he has fallen into an ocean of peace and silence. It doesn't matter if he speaks, sings, cries, or meditates, that sensation remains. In the first stages of the path, it's very difficult to handle silence as a practice, because as soon as we detect an absence of thoughts, a mischievous little voice congratulates us for it. And that automatically breaks the state. The problem happens because you confuse the objective of sorcerers with an ideal. The concept of silence is too delicate for a mind like yours, accustomed to classifications. It is obvious that you have thought about the exercise in auditory terms, as a lack of sound. But that's not what it is about. What sorcerers want is something simpler. They try to resist the suggestions, and that's all. If you are able to make yourself the owner of your mind, and to think properly, without prejudice or false convictions, you will be able to cancel out the domestic part of your nature, as a supreme achievement. Otherwise, you will not even understand what the exercise is about. Once we learn how to prevent them, without being offended by them nor giving them any kind of attention, the commands of the mind will stay in our interior for some time, but eventually they will leave. So it is not a question of getting rid of them, but rather killing them with boredom. To reach that state, you have to rattle your inventory of ideas. I asked you to begin with your beliefs, but it would have worked equally well if, for example, you had listed all your relationships and affections, or the most attractive elements in your personal history, or your hopes, goals, and concerns, or your likes, preferences and aversions. The important thing is that you become aware of your thought patterns. The magic of all inventories is based in the order of its components. When we rattle that order, when it lacks some of the pieces that we gave it, the whole pattern begins to crumble. This is the way it is with routines of the mind. You change one parameter, suddenly there is an open door where it should be a wall, and that changes everything. The mind trembles. That is what you have been experiencing as an extraordinary activation of your interior dialogue. You didn't even notice it before, but now you know it is there. Someday that presence will be so heavy that you will do something about it. That day you will stop being an ordinary man and will become a sorcerer. The human laziness which makes us hope that others will do things and give us the greatest possible advantage is the antithesis of a warrior's behavior. All that a man needs is the minimal chance to be aware of the possibilities discovered by sorcerers. A warrior doesn't go around hoping they will come and kick him to make him move. He is ahead and he says, I can do it. And I can do it alone. An ordinary man's access to the sorcerer's knowledge is determined by intent. Man's intent has to make an offer to the spirit, and the spirit must accept it, putting the means of evolution in his path. In other times, the only available way was to be directly pointed out to a Nagual. Nowadays, an ordinary man has the opportunity to be guided through publications. When seeking access to the world of sorcerers, one must be prepared. An accidental encounter with power won't lead to anything, except to a brutal fright for the seeker who, from then on, will swear that sorcery is demon's work, or that everything is sheer falsehood. But a poorly conducted preparation, one which foments self-importance instead of increasing wonder and a desire to learn, becomes a near-total obstacle for the apprentice. One who comes to the Nagual saturated with beliefs on almost everything won't get the chance to continue. Therefore, the next requirement before entering the path of knowledge is a profound honesty. It is necessary to empty the harbor to make room for the new ship arriving, and recognize that when it comes down to it, we won't know anything. Once that degree of preparation has been reached, the rest is a matter of luck. The spirit determines who will be chosen and who won't. The answer of the spirit is inscrutable. It happens in unexpected ways and in terms that are almost always incomprehensible to our reason. All we can do is to be attentive to the signs, placing ourselves deliberately in their path. When man's intent seals an alliance with the spirit, it is unavoidable that the teacher appears. And Nagual never chooses his apprentices. The spirit is the one who determines through omens who can and who can't be a part of a lineage. A real teacher is an impeccable warrior who has lost his human form and has a very clear bond with the abstract. So, he doesn't accept volunteers. Education systems based on the seeker's spontaneous desire don't get very far, because they are not geared towards realization, but towards the concern of the ego. All the followers do is to imitate, and that doesn't lead anywhere. Therefore, there is no need for teachers. After years of learning, I am convinced that all a seeker needs is the opportunity to be made aware of his possibilities, and a commitment to the death with his purpose. Sorcerers make a clear distinction between the concept of spiritual guide and Nagual teacher. The first is an individual who specializes in directing flocks, and the other is an impeccable warrior who knows that his role is limited to serving as a connection with the spirit. The first one will tell you what you want to hear, and he will give you the miracles that you want to see because you interest him as an acolyte. While the second will be guided by commands of an impersonal power. His help is not altruistic, but a way of paying his old debt with the spirit of man. The Nagual is not a benevolent type. He doesn't come to please us, but to wake us up, and he will do it with a stick if necessary, because he doesn't feel any compassion. When intervening in the life of his apprentices, he can produce a condition of such agitation in them that their latent energies are activated. Human beings have the tendency of behaving in imitative ways, something I categorize as the behavior of primates. Our great opportunity, and at the same time our great anxiety, is an abyss of silent knowledge which is still inside each one of us. Below the noise of the mind, we all have the sensation that there is something indefinite, something that makes us grab anything which will alleviate this pressure of the unknown. Frequently, that feeling takes us to fanaticism, and there are always those willing to profit from other people's faith. What I have seen is that most teachers are as asleep as their followers, but they have learned how to hide it. Imagine a planet where all the residents are blind. Among them circulates the myth that it is possible to see, but no one has verified it. One day someone arrives and says, I can see. What can they do? Either believe, or not believe, and there will always be some who hope. It doesn't matter if the teacher is also blind, it's very easy for him to take advantage of the situation. The indescribable force doesn't demand that you revere it, only that you fill yourself with awareness. To fall on your knees before the unknown is totally useless, but to do it before another human being is the pinnacle of idiocy. The ape that we have inside yearns to have someone to guide him. He needs to believe that there are superior entities who can magically solve his problems. As children, we are always hoping that somebody will show up and take care of the situation. From this, cults are born that, in essence, are ways of leaving the responsibility for one's own growth in other people's hands. We have been deceived. We have been told that we are special because we are rational, but that is not true. The human being wants desperately to obey, and dies from fear when his valuable beliefs are removed. We ignore the source of life and knowledge that we have inside. Examine yourself with total honesty. Don't look for a teacher. To become responsible for one's own existence is an anomaly, a violation of laws, a state of passion out of the ordinary, a fight that demands your entire life. It is the only procedure that will renew our energy. I don't know if you will be able to understand this detail, to know yourself as an intent of warriors. Nobody can intend it for you. A principle of stalkers is not to confront anybody, and certainly not people more powerful than themselves. Take care of your learning, the rest, what does it matter? True Toltec warriors are not fanatical about anything. Their behavior is strictly dictated by impeccability. The best way of deploying our perception is through dreaming. As a method, dreaming is simple, comprehensive and, above all, natural. The goal of an apprentice is to take the reins of his assemblage point. Once he is able to displace it, he had to repeat those movements, without external help, by force of discipline and impeccability. Then we can say the warrior has found an ally. Nothing is as fragile as the fixation of the assemblage point. The art of agreeing is so special that we spend 20 years of daily training to achieve it. Those who do achieve it, we call adults, and those who don't are crazy. However, nothing is easier for us than moving to new universes. To do it, we just have to return to what we were. The fixation of the assemblage point consumes enormous quantities of energy, and produces a static vision of the world. The energy used in that way is dispersed all through our luminosity, and it winds up crammed in along its borders, where it forms dense masses that create a reflection of the self. Under these circumstances, to change the fixation becomes an exhausting task. To break the trap of fixation, one should try any recourse. In most cases, only a push coming from the outside can cause the movement of a person's assemblage point. When we have a great deal of luck, we receive that push through the blow of a Nagual. Once the initial displacement is achieved, the warrior should fight for control of his attention, by means of exercises of intent and practicing dreaming. Dreaming is the escape door for the human race, and it is the only thing that can give our existence its appropriate dimension. For some, dreaming is the hardest aspect of this teaching. First, because many cannot distinguish the concept of dreaming from ordinary dreams, which are two totally different things for a sorcerer. Second, because the idea of focusing the attention on sleeping instead of on awakening seems contrary to everything they have learned in their philosophical search and life. Both these considerations very quickly have many avoid dreaming, without ever accepting it as an authentic and reachable possibility. They justified all this by saying to themselves that such an irrational topic isn't even worth the pain of trying to analyze it. Each human being brings his basic inclination with him at birth. Not everybody can be a good dreamer, some find stalking easier. The important thing is that you insist. If you are not yet dreaming, then you have not done enough. If you promise yourself that you will not eat, or pronounce a word, until you dream, you will see what happens. Something in your interior becomes soft, the dialogue gives in and, kaboom. Keep in mind that dreaming is not just an option, it's something basic. If you don't accomplish it, you cannot continue on the path. To achieve it you must want to do it. It is as simple as that. Don't exaggerate the difficulty of this exercise. Dreaming is open to everybody, because to start, it barely requires the minimum of deliberation that is necessary to learn how to type or to drive a car. Don't be confused by the words. When sorcerers speak of dreaming and awakening, the terms don't have anything to do with the physical states you know. I don't have any choice but to use your language, because otherwise you would not understand me at all. But if you don't do your part, and put aside everyday meanings and try to penetrate the meaning of what I'm telling you, you will never get out of this state of mistrust. I can only guarantee you that, once you discard the laziness that prevents you from facing the challenge, and attack dreaming directly and without hesitations, your mental mess will clear up by itself. Imagine a confirmed believer, one of those who cannot do anything without requesting permission from his God beforehand. Once he falls asleep, what happens with his convictions, where do they go? They turn off like the flame of a candle in the wind. When you dream, you are the owner of yourself. Your visions are isolated bubbles, without connections to each other and without memory of the self. Of course, the force of habit will almost always take you to dreams where you are yourself, but you might be brave or a coward, young or old, man or woman. Truly, you are only an assemblage point which moves at random, nothing personal. For the ordinary man, the difference between being awake and dreaming is that in the first state his attention flows with continuity, and in the second it flows in a disordered manner, but in both experiences, the degree of participation from the will is minimal. A person will wake up in the place where, as always, he puts his personality on like a shirt and goes out to fulfill his routine tasks. Upon falling asleep, he gets disconnected again, because he doesn't know he can do something else. Our everyday wakefulness doesn't leave us room to stop and wonder if this world that we are perceiving now is as real as it seems. And the same thing must be said of any ordinary dream. While it lasts, we accept it as an unquestionable fact, we never judge it, or, to put it in more practical terms, we never intend to remember, while inside the dream, some command or agreement made while awake. But there is another way of directing attention, and the result of that can neither be called dreaming nor awake, because it starts from a deliberate use of intent. What happens there is that we take charge of our awareness, and it is the same whether we are sleeping or awake, because it is something that transcends both states. That is the true awakening, to take charge of our attention. The Toltec teachings emphasize dreaming. It doesn't matter how it is described, the result is that the perspective chaos of an ordinary dream is transformed into a practical space, where we can act intelligently. A dreamer can remember himself under any circumstance. He always has a password on hand, a pact he has made with his will, which lets him align with warrior's intent in a microsecond. He can sustain the vision of his dream, whatever it may be, and return to it as many times as he wants to explore and analyze it. And better still, within that vision, he can meet other warriors. That is what sorcerers call stalking and dreaming. This technique allows us to intend objectives and pursue actions, just as we do in the daily world. We can solve problems and learn things. What you learn there is coherent, it works. Maybe you cannot explain how you received that knowledge, but you won't forget it. Life is learned by living it. The same happens in dreams, but there we learn how to dream. Those on the path sometimes hit upon other abilities. My teacher, for example, used to use his dreaming body to look for hidden things. It is not so extraordinary. We can all carry out similar feats, it is not even difficult to understand how it happens. Imagine somebody teaches you a new language while you sleep, the result is that you learn that language and you can remember it when you wake up. In the same way, if you witness something in that state, like a lost object or an event that is happening somewhere else, you can go and verify it later. If it is just as you dreamt it, then it was a dream. Learning in dreaming is a resource much used by sorcerers. I learned much about plants in that way and I still remember all of it. Don't underestimate your resources. Everything the spirit has put inside us has a transcendent meaning. It means dreams are there to be used. If it were not so, they would not exist. The techniques I have described to you are not speculations, I have personally checked them out. The art of dreaming is a message to people, but most don't pay any attention. I've encouraged you to expand your vision, not out of any selfish concern, but for the sheer pleasure of transmitting to you a superior state of awareness. Most prefer to wallow in second-hand beliefs and habitual doubts. Maybe it's not your destiny to be a brilliant flying warrior, but you don't have any excuses. Like everyone, you too are splendidly equipped for dreaming. If you don't get it, it is because you don't want to. Any state of awareness that involves an unusual position of the assemblage point is technically a dream. The advantage of dreams over everyday states of attention is that they allow us to cover a wider sensory spectrum, and to better synthesize the information we receive. In other words, we learn how to live with more intensity. The result, greater clarity in our perceptual process. Above all, dreaming gives us access to critical events in our past, such as our birth and early childhood, and it illuminates traumatic situations and altered states of awareness in our past. A sorcerer cannot leave aside his most harrowing experiences. Dreaming is not something impossible, it is just a kind of deep meditation. There is no way of meditating without dreaming. For sorcerers, both terms describe the same phenomenon. What most practice and called meditation is not meditation, but some kind of autosuggestion. Pacifying the mind is not mediation, but drowsiness. On the other hand, dreaming is something dynamic. It is the consequence of a process of sustained concentration, which implies a veritable battle against our lack of attention. If it were just the result of a dulling of the senses, practitioners would not call themselves warriors. A dreamer can be the very incarnation of ferocity or seem profoundly calm, but none of that has any real importance, because he does not identify himself with his mental states. He knows that any definite sensation is nothing but a fixation of the assemblage point. Dreaming happens when we achieve a certain balance in our daily life, and only after silencing the internal dialogue. The term dreaming is not the most appropriate to describe an exercise of awareness which has nothing to do with the content of the mind. I use it out of respect for the tradition of my lineage, but the ancient seers called it something else. Expert sorcerers dream, starting from their state of vigil as easily as from sleeping, because for them it is not about closing the eyes and snoring, rather it is about witnessing other worlds which are out there. From the point of view of the will, what distinguishes a dream from the daytime vigil of a sorcerer, is that the energy obeys other laws. He can carry out incredible feats like passing through a wall or moving to the ends of the universe in a blink of an eye. Such experiences are complete and accumulative, and only somebody who has not lived them himself would cling to logical categories to explain them. But those kinds of manifestations, however valuable, are not the objective of dreaming. To dream is essential for you, because access to the Nagual happens almost exclusively in that state. The reason is evident. People who have a natural tendency to dream, and a surplus of energy, qualify to find other, more advanced dreamers, either accidentally or because they deliberately look for them. Occasionally, these traveling companions accept to take charge of instructing them more deeply in the art. Once an apprentice begins to shine, it is inevitable that he will attract the attention of a Nagual. Naguals are like eagles, constantly stalking. As soon as they detect an increment of awareness, they swoop in, because a voluntary dreamer is a rarity. For a teacher, it is much easier to stimulate an effort that has already begun, than creating one from nothing. Sorcerers maintain contact with many warriors from various parts of the world through dreaming. Another reason why dreaming is a door to knowledge, is that its practice allows us to resolve 1,000 problems derived from learning, like the lack of clarity and attention in a beginner, his mistrust regarding his instructor's activities, and the intrinsic danger of some of the techniques. This art softens the obsessive nature of the emanations of the indescribable force, which could otherwise destroy the psychological balance and the will of an apprentice. You ask, what can those who don't dream do, in order to gain access to these teachings? You have the wrong focus. The true question would be, what should I do to dream? A warrior cannot walk around in the world leaving loose ends with every step. If you genuinely cannot consider your dreams a part of your life, if you cannot visualize them as what they are, avenues to power, if you do not even understand what they are or what purpose they serve, well, then you have a lot of work before you. Within our sphere of perception, there is a force separated from what we call oneself, which is detectable through dreaming. That force can be made aware of itself, absorbing the principles of our personality, and behaving with independence. The sensation that dealing with it produces in us is unspeakable, because it is an inorganic being. It has appearance, but no mass. For you, it is only a mental projection. However, from that being's point of view, it is our physical body that lives in an imaginary world. If you had the energy and the necessary concentration to become aware of your other self, and you asked that being what it thinks of your everyday world, he would answer that he considers it quite unreal, almost a myth. And, you know what? It would be right. Our dreaming body has many uses. It can move in no time in whatever place you want and discover things. It can even be materialized, creating a visual double, something that other people can see, whether they are sleeping or awake. However, it continues being a mere appearance, it does not have any bodily functions. A human being sees it as person, but an animal would see it differently. I know all this because I verify it permanently because my dreaming double receives all my attention. When I want to know something from it or about the world where it moves, I ask it and it tells me. You can also do it, it is not that difficult. You can contact your energy this very night, as soon as you fall asleep. There are many ways. For example, look for a mirror in your dreams, lean towards it and look yourself in the eyes, you'll see what a surprise awaits you. We are speaking of awareness, not of physical objects. Those entities, even the perceptive unit we call the physical body, are descriptions of the same thing, because there are not two of you. You are you. You don't have an energy body, you are energy, you are an assemblage point that assembles emanations, and you are only one. You can have various dreams and have a different appearance in each one, either human, animal, or inorganic, and you can even dream that you are several people at the same time, but you cannot fragment your being aware. Confusing the description of our various vehicles of awareness with our sense of being is common, particularly for people who have a robust and intellectual internal dialogue. When I speak of the dreaming double and of the energy body, I am talking about practically the same thing. The first one can be reached through dreaming and the second by means of stalking. Or put in another way, the energy body is the dreaming double with voluntary control on the part of the dreamer, but both are one and the same thing. The difference lies in the way one reaches it. The ancient sorcerers melded their dreaming double by the power of their will, and tried to reproduce the physical body down to the smallest detail. Calling it a double stems from that tradition. The idea makes practical sense, since we are so accustomed to see ourselves in a certain way and only that way. In the beginning, it is very comfortable for the dreamer to consider himself in physical terms. But the new seers say that taking this intent to its furthest consequences is a useless waste, because it forces us to dedicate huge quantities of attention to details that will never have any practical use. They have learned to see ourselves as what we really are, bubbles of light. Dreaming is the deliberate use of the energy body. Energy is plastic, and if you apply a constant pressure to it, it will eventually adopt the form you want. The double is the Nagual, the other, the stamp of Nagualism. When you control it, you are on the road to become whatever you want, from a free being to a beast. Of course, to achieve something so specialized as becoming an animal can't just be improvised, there are procedures. The double is managed through the fixation of the assemblage point in new positions. Such a fixation has an obsessive nature, and it should be evoked with sorcerer's methods. For example, if your yearning is to be a hawk and you attempt it with inflexibility, you will end up becoming one. Each one of us will achieve what we look for. That is the trick of the Nagual, to manage his obsessions. However, you should know that people who focus on objectives that are not exclusively those of freedom and sobriety, become blocked, which can take them to madness, or to the most crass ordinariness. Truly, that is what we all do, we choose to be men, and we are. Any obsession not properly managed means slavery. The problem with many Naguals of modern Mexico is that they have forgotten the abstract possibilities. There are sorcerers who prefer to become turkeys, and they don't come out of there. What's more, many don't have any idea that they can do something more with their energy than pursue strong sensations and scare others. That decadence of the teachings is what moved seers of my teacher's lineage to attempt freedom in the most impersonal way possible, abandoning all the capricious positions of the assemblage point which they had inherited from their ancestors. The purpose of freedom is absolutely clean and displaces all others. By attempting it, new seers have restored the purity of Nagualism. For most sorcerers, the enormous effort which is required, in order to prepare a double in the environment of dreaming, is the other option, the door for another realm of awareness which will allow them, at the proper moment, to intend the definite step into the third attention. By providing autonomy and purpose to their double, they are preparing to remain conscious after death. When that body is complete and the moment arrives, their awareness abandons the human shell for good, the physical body withers and dies, but the sense of being continues. Seriously consider the amount of effort you invested in sustaining your self-importance. Not in the coarse and common forms it usually shows itself, like self-sufficiency, or whining for attention, but in its more subtle aspects, linked to fundamental ideas that you have about the world. Such reflections didn't bring you any certainty. On the contrary, you are beginning to notice how the enormity of the ideological framework in which you live, and which you have always taken for granted, is trembling. The art of stalking consists of using your prey's own habits and routines to catch it. We can apply this strategy to ordinary life where we can project it against our internal demons, like doubt, laziness, and self-indulgence. Learning about dreaming doesn't offend anyone. The worst you can do is not believe that such a thing is possible. Stalking, on the other hand, the way sorcerers practice it, is very offensive to reason. In the initial phase, the apprentice is under crossfire and is very frustrated, not able to let go of his ego. Like a coin, stalking has two faces. On the one hand, it is the easiest thing in the world, on the other, it is a very difficult technique, not because it's complex, but because it deals with aspects of oneself that people usually don't want to deal with. Stalking induces minuscule, but very solid, movements of the assemblage point, not like dreaming, which moves you deeply, but bounces you like a rubber ball and returns you immediately to what you were. When you look around, you see everything the same way as you always did, so you will continue to use your everyday approach to things. If, in this situation, you are forced to make some change, you will likely be offended, or wounded in your pride, and quit the teaching. On the level where you are now, the only thing that allows you to handle stalking is to approach it with dreaming methods. If at any point you should feel that I am touching on topics that are too personal, or you have an attack of suspicions, look at your hands or use any other reminder you have chosen. The dreaming attention will help you break your fixation.